My son called me on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the porch watching the sun come up over the east pasture, drinking my coffee the way I always have, black and hot, the way my wife taught me before she passed. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was sleeping or whether my knee was giving me trouble again. He just said, "Dad, listen, we sold the ranch. The buyers want possession by Friday. You need to be out." Then he hung up. I held the phone in my hand and looked out at 600 acres of red Texas dirt that my father had broken his back to buy in 1961. I looked at the creek that cut through the south pasture, the same creek where I taught my son to fish when he was 7 years old. I looked at the old barn my grandfather built with boards he hauled from a mill in Lubbock. I took a sip of my coffee and set the phone down on the rail. "But you forgot something, son," I said to the empty morning air. If he had stayed on the line, he would have asked what I meant. He would have laughed and told me I was getting sentimental. He would have said, "Dad, it's just property. Let it go." And I would have laughed right back, because what he sold, the thing he was so proud of liquidating, the land he thought was his golden ticket out of the disaster he had made of his finances, he didn't actually own all of it. Not even close. But before I tell you how I turned his victory celebration into the worst morning of his life, let me tell you who I am. My name is Robert Calloway. I am 68 years old. I spent 32 years as an oil and gas attorney in Houston, negotiating subsurface rights, mineral leases, and royalty agreements for companies you have heard of. They used to call me ironclad in the conference rooms because once I wrote a contract, nothing got out of it. I retired at 63 when my wife, Margaret, got sick. I came home to this ranch to take care of her, to sit with her on this same porch, to watch these same sunrises until there were no more sunrises left for her. When she passed 18 months ago, I thought I had nothing left to protect. I was wrong. My son arrived that afternoon in a truck that cost more than my first house. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a collared shirt that was too tight across the chest, and boots that had never touched actual dirt. His wife was in the passenger seat, already on her phone before the engine cut off, her nails done in a color I didn't have a name for, her sunglasses bigger than her face. They came up the porch steps together, and my son had the look of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say a dozen times in the truck on the way over. He sat down in the chair across from me. His wife stayed standing, leaning against the rail, scrolling. "Dad," he said, lacing his fingers together the way he used to do in school when he was about to explain why he hadn't done his homework. "I know this is hard to hear, but the ranch has been sitting here doing nothing. It's not generating income. The property taxes alone are bleeding us dry. We found a buyer, a development group out of Dallas. They're paying fair market value. It's done. The paperwork is signed." I looked at him over my coffee cup. "I see. We put a deposit down on a place in Austin. A condo. Nice building, doorman, the whole thing. It's more appropriate for where you are in life right now. Ground floor, no stairs. You'll love it." His wife nodded without looking up from her phone, which I suppose was her version of encouragement. "And the money from the sale?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. "We're handling the finances. There are some debts that need to be cleared up first, some investments that went sideways. Once everything is settled, whatever's left will go into an account for your care." "Investments that went sideways," I repeated. He stood up. He was done with the conversation. In his mind, the hard part was over. He had delivered the news, and now the old man just needed time to accept it. "Friday, Dad. We'll send movers Thursday morning. Pack what you want to keep. Everything else, the furniture, the equipment, it all conveys with the property." He walked back to the truck. His wife followed him, still on her phone. I watched the truck go back down the gravel road, kicking up a dust trail that drifted out over the south pasture and dissolved in the morning heat. I sat there a long time after they were gone. I looked at the front door where Margaret had hung a horseshoe the week we moved in, nails up for luck, the way her mother taught her. I looked at the garden she had planted along the fence line, still blooming in her absence because I had watered it every single morning since she left, the way she would have wanted. I felt the weight of the silence the way you feel a bruise, dull and deep and everywhere at once. Then I stood up, went inside to the kitchen, and called the only person who mattered right now. "Carter," I said when he answered. "It's Robert." I need you to pull the Callaway Ranch Mineral Estate file, the one with the Lone Star Mineral Holdings paperwork. There was a pause. Carter had been my associate for 11 years, before I retired. He knew every deal I had ever structured, every trap I had ever built into a contract. "Robert," he said slowly, "what happened?" "My son sold the surface rights to a development group, signed everything over, closed the deal." Another pause. I could hear Carter thinking, did he check the mineral estate separation filing? "No," I said. "He did not." Carter exhaled. "How long ago did you do the severance?" 1997. Margaret and I did it together when we first started worrying about estate planning. The surface goes to the heirs. The mineral rights, the oil, the gas, the coal, the subsurface access corridors, all of it, stay in the LLC. Lone Star Mineral Holdings. I am the sole member. "Robert." Carter's voice had gone quiet the way it always did when he saw something beautiful and terrible at the same time. "The Permian Basin trend runs under your south pasture. 14 producing wells on the adjacent tract," I confirmed. 3 independent geologists have told me there's a continuous formation running under my land. Whoever buys that surface thinks they're buying land they can develop. What they're actually buying is the lid on a box they can't open. And, without a surface use agreement with the mineral owner, they can't drill, can't run pipeline, can't access the subsurface. I can enforce ingress and egress rights that would make their development plan impossible. The whole project falls apart. There was a long silence on Carter's end. Then, "Did your son know about the mineral severance?" I looked out the kitchen window at Margaret's garden. "He signed the estate planning documents in 2001. His name is on the acknowledgement page. He was 20 years old. He signed where the sticky note told him to sign and went back to his video games." "Robert," Carter said carefully, "you could call the buyers. You could disclose this now. The deal would fall through. Your son gets nothing, but he doesn't go to prison." I thought about Thursday. I thought about the movers my son was going to send to pack up my wife's life in cardboard boxes. I thought about the condo in Austin with the doorman and the ground floor and no stairs, which was his way of saying he already thought of me as an invalid to be warehoused somewhere convenient. "Carter," I said, "do you remember what you used to call me in the conference room?" A pause. Then quietly, "Ironclad." "Let it close," I said. "Let the money hit his account. Then meet me in Midland on Thursday. Bring the mineral estate file and the surface use restriction documents. And Carter, call someone who does forensic accounting. I want to know exactly what my son owes and to whom." I spent the next 2 days doing what my son expected me to do. I packed boxes. I walked the property one last time, the south pasture at sunset, the creek in the early morning, the barn where my father's initials were carved into the second beam from the left, put there when he was 23 years old and didn't know yet what kind of man his son would become, or his grandson after him. I took what I needed. I left everything that was too big to move and too heavy to forget. On Wednesday night, the forensic accountant Carter had retained called me at the motel just outside Midland, where I had checked in under my middle name. "Mr. Callaway," he said, "your son's financial picture is about as bad as it gets without being in active bankruptcy proceedings." He walked me through it the way you describe a car accident, carefully, because the details are too specific to rush. My son owed a private equity firm in Dallas $400,000 from a restaurant venture that collapsed during the pandemic. He owed 2 separate investors in a commercial real estate deal that never broke ground. His wife had a line of credit for her interior design business that had been in default for 8 months. They were 90 days behind on the mortgage for the house they lived in, a house with a kitchen renovation that cost more than most families make in a year. The ranch sale was going to clear everything, the accountant said. Barely. They'd come out with maybe $200,000 left over after all the debts were paid. Not enough to live on for long, but enough to feel like they'd survived. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in the motel chair and looked at my hands. Old hands. The kind that have signed 10,000 documents and shaken 1,000 hands, and held one woman's hand at the end of her life. My son didn't come to me when the debts started stacking up. He didn't call his father, the retired oil and gas attorney who had spent 3 decades knowing how money moves and where it hides. He went behind my back and sold the ground under my feet Because it was easier than admitting he had failed. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just decided that my 60 years on that land was a financial instrument he could cash out when he needed it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair until the sky outside the window went from black to gray to the pale orange of a Texas dawn. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the last thing she said to me, which was that she was worried about my son, that she could see something in him that scared her. A willingness to take shortcuts, to cut corners on the things that mattered. I had told her she was wrong. I had told her that underneath all of it he was a good boy, that he just needed time. I picked up the phone and called Carter. Thursday morning, I said. We go at 8. The development group had sent representatives to the ranch. By the time Carter and I arrived on Thursday, there were 2 of them in matching company polo shirts, clipboards in hand, walking the perimeter of the south pasture, with the bright-eyed enthusiasm of men who thought they had just purchased a very good deal. A survey crew was setting up equipment along the east fence line. Near the porch, a truck from a commercial real estate company was parked. And standing next to it, talking on his phone with the relaxed posture of a man who had already won, was my son. He saw my car come up the road and his expression shifted. The relaxed posture tightened. He said something into the phone and lowered it. His wife stepped out of the truck and stood beside him, arms crossed. Carter and I got out of the car. Carter was 64, thin as a fence post, wearing a suit that he had probably owned since 2004. He carried his briefcase the way surgeons carry their instruments. Like the tools inside were serious, and the work was serious, and there was no room for anything else. Behind us, a second vehicle pulled up. A woman in a gray blazer got out, introduced herself to no one in particular, and stood to one side. She was from the Texas General Land Office, a state mineral rights compliance officer. Carter had called her the day before. My son walked toward me. He looked confused but not yet alarmed. Dad, what are you doing here? I thought the movers handled everything. I came to see my ranch one more time, I said, and to meet the new owners. The development representative who had been walking the pasture came over, extending his hand. Mr. Calloway? I'm the project manager for the Hardin Group. We're very excited about this acquisition. We've got a residential and mixed-use development planned for the western section, and we're in early talks with an energy firm about the subsurface potential on the south parcel. I shook his hand. That's interesting, I said. Tell me more about the subsurface. He smiled. Well, the geological surveys we've commissioned suggest there could be significant hydrocarbon potential in the lower formations. We've got a partner group lined up. Pending access negotiation. Access negotiation with whom? I asked. He blinked. With the surface owner. With us? Once the deed conveys. That's where we have a problem, Carter said. He opened his briefcase and removed a bound document with a cover sheet that read Lone Star Mineral Holdings, LLC. Mineral Estate Severance and Deed of Record. Callaway Ranch. Garza County, Texas. Recorded the 14th of October, 1997. He handed it to the project manager. My son took a step forward. What is that? That, I said, is a document your grandfather signed. And then I signed. And then you signed. In October of 2001. It's the severance deed that separated the mineral estate from the surface estate of this property 27 years ago. The surface rights, the land, the grass, the buildings, all of it was transferred to the family estate. The mineral rights, the oil, the gas, the subsurface strata, the access corridors, everything below the surface, were retained by Lone Star Mineral Holdings, LLC, of which I am the sole member. The project manager was reading the document. His face had gone still, the way a person's face goes still when they are reading something they did not expect to read and do not know yet how bad it is going to be. What that means in practical terms, Carter continued, his voice level and pleasant, as though he were explaining something to a first-year law student, is that your company purchased the surface rights to this property. You did not purchase the mineral estate, because the mineral estate was never available for purchase. It was never part of the deed your company executed. You paid approximately $3.8 million for the surface of a property on which you cannot drill, cannot run pipeline, cannot access the subsurface formation and cannot complete the energy development component of your project without a surface use agreement from Lone Star Mineral Holdings. The project manager looked up from the document. And Lone Star Mineral Holdings is my father, my son said. His voice had gone very quiet. Everyone turned to look at him. He was standing very still, his face doing something complicated that I had not seen since he was a child caught in a lie. His wife had moved closer to him, her arms still crossed, but there was something different in her posture now. The certainty had drained out of her. Robert Calloway, the state mineral rights officer, confirmed, stepping forward, is the registered agent and sole member of Lone Star Mineral Holdings per the Texas Secretary of State Records and the Garza County Appraisal District Mineral Estate filing. The mineral estate was legally severed from the surface estate in 1997 and has never been part of any subsequent transfer. The project manager lowered the document. He looked at my son with an expression I recognized from 30 years of litigation. It was the expression of a man who has just realized he is in the room with someone who has caused him a significant financial problem. You represented to us in the sales contract that you were conveying full fee simple title to this property, he said. That representation was made without qualification. My son opened his mouth. You represented, the project manager continued, his voice losing its earlier pleasantness entirely, that there were no encumbrances, no outstanding rights, no third-party interests in the subsurface. Your attorney certified the title. Your title insurance underwriter issued a policy, and none of you disclosed a recorded mineral severance deed that has been sitting in the county records for 27 years. I didn't know, my son said. The words came out thin and young, like something a child says when the evidence is already on the table. Carter reached into his briefcase again. You signed the acknowledgement of the mineral severance in October 2001. Your signature is on page 11. He produced the page. My son looked at his own nat. The way people look at photographs from years they would rather forget. His wife unfolded her arms. She had been quiet until now. Processing. Running calculations. Robert, she said, addressing me directly for the first time, her voice carefully controlled. What do you want? What is it going to take to make this go away? I don't want anything to go away, I said. I just want everyone in this conversation to understand the legal situation. The project manager stepped away from our group and made a phone call. I watched him pace the length of the driveway, his voice getting louder before going quiet, one hand pressed against his forehead. Behind him, the survey crew had stopped working. They were standing in a loose group near their equipment, watching. My son walked toward me. He stopped about 6 feet away, which was the distance of a man who wasn't sure whether he was coming to beg or to argue. Dad, he said. His voice had lost the rehearsed confidence he had arrived with. You planned this. You knew about the mineral severance. You let the deal close. You didn't ask me, I said. You called me on a Tuesday morning and told me I had until Friday. You could have said something. So could you, son. You could have called me when the restaurant failed. You could have called me when the real estate deal went sideways. You could have knocked on my door and sat down at my kitchen table and said, Dad, I'm in trouble. I need help. I would have helped you. That's what fathers do. He looked away, out across the south pasture. But you didn't, I said. You decided I was an obstacle. You decided the land your grandfather broke his back to buy, and your grandmother cried over when she turned the first key in that front door, was just an asset you could liquidate to clean up a mess. You didn't want to admit you had. Mad. You decided that without asking me, without telling me, without giving me any choice in the matter. The project manager came back. He was not interested in our family conversation. He had a job to do, and the job had just gotten considerably more complicated. He addressed my son directly. Our legal team is reviewing the title chain. Pending their assessment, we are placing the wire transfer funds in escrow. You will not have access to the purchase price until this mineral rights issue is resolved. If the mineral estate severance is confirmed as recorded, and based on what I'm looking at, it will be, then we have grounds to rescind the contract and demand a full refund. My son turned white. The money. We already used part of it. We cleared the business loans. Then I suggest you find a way to make that money available, the project manager said. Because if this contract is rescinded, you owe us $3.8 million. His wife made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She sat down on the step of the truck, her sunglasses slightly askew, her phone loose in her hand, the screen dark. For the first time all morning, my son turned to me. The last of the performance was gone. What was left was just a man in his 40s who had made very bad choices and was standing in the wreckage of them on a clear Thursday morning in front of the father he had tried to dispossess. "Dad, please, sign a surface use agreement. If you grant them subsurface access, the deal is valid. The energy development proceeds. They keep the land. I keep the money. It's a signature. You could fix this with one signature." I looked at him for a long time. I thought about the fishing trips. I thought about the years of tuition I paid and never mentioned again. I thought about the afternoon I sat in a hospital room and watched my wife reach for his hand, and how much that moment had meant to her, and how soon he had left that afternoon because he had a dinner reservation. The surface use agreement would be worth between $2 and $3 million in negotiated royalties and access fees over a 20-year mineral development program, I said. "That is not a small thing I am being asked to sign away." "I know," he said. "Margaret's garden is along the north fence line," I said. "When she planted it, she asked me to promise that no one would ever pave it over. When you sold this ranch to a development group, you broke that promise for her. You broke it without even knowing it was a promise that existed, because you never asked." He looked at the garden. Something moved in his face. "I'm not going to sign the surface use agreement today," I said. "I'm going to take the ranch back. I'm going to negotiate directly with the development group for a modified arrangement that preserves the residential land use and separates out the subsurface access. I'm going to keep Lone Star Mineral Holdings whole, and I'm going to water your mother's garden myself on Monday morning the way I always have." "And me?" he asked. "You're going to hire a bankruptcy attorney," I said, "and then you're going to call the people you owe and work out a payment plan. And when you've done that, when you've sat down with the mess you made and dealt with it honestly, instead of selling someone else's land to cover it up, you're going to call me, not to ask for anything, just to talk, the way we used to." He didn't say anything. His wife was on her feet again, but the armor was down. She looked smaller than she had this morning, and younger. Carter stepped forward and handed the project manager a second document. "Lone Star Mineral Holdings is prepared to enter immediate renegotiation regarding the surface use terms. Mr. Callaway is prepared to consider a modified surface use agreement that permits the residential development component while retaining full mineral access rights for the LLC. This is not a reversal of the mineral severance. It is a separate commercial negotiation between the mineral estate owner and the surface estate holder. We are available to begin those discussions at your convenience." The project manager looked at the document, then at me, with a different expression than he'd had 20 minutes ago. "You restructured the deal," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I preserved my options," I said. 2 weeks later, Carter called me at the ranch. I was on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun come up over the east pasture the way I always do. "The modified surface use agreement is signed," he said. "Lone Star Mineral Holdings retains full mineral rights with a 50-year development window. You get a 12% royalty on gross production, guaranteed minimum annual payment of $240,000 beginning year 2, and a hard surface use exclusion zone around the north fence line and the existing garden area." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 weeks. "The development group is satisfied," Carter continued. "The residential component proceeds on the western acreage. The mineral program launches in spring. And Robert, the early assessments from the energy partner suggest the South Formation could be significantly productive. We're talking about a royalty stream that could run well into 8 figures over the life of the wells." "Thank you, Carter," I said. "One more thing," he said. "Your son called my office yesterday. He left a message. He said he's working with the bankruptcy attorney. He said the investors are taking a negotiated settlement. He said he'd like to call you when things settle down." I looked out at the pasture. Margaret's garden was green along the north fence line, the October roses starting to come in. "Tell him he knows where I am," I said. 6 months after that Thursday morning on the driveway, I was sitting in the same chair on the same porch when a truck pulled up. Not the expensive one. An older one, the kind a man drives when he's stopped trying to look like something he isn't. My son got out alone. He came up the porch steps with his hands in his pockets and sat down in the chair across from me without being invited, the way he used to when he was a boy and wanted to tell me something he wasn't sure how to say. We sat there for a while without talking. The creak was audible from the porch if you were quiet enough to listen for it. "I found your grandfather's initials in the barn," he said finally. "The ones on the second beam. I don't know how I never noticed them before." "You were never looking for them," I said. He nodded slowly. He looked at Margaret's garden along the fence line, the roses she had planted the year we were married, still there, still blooming on schedule without her. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't come to you when I was in trouble. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see that I had failed." I looked at my son. He was 41 years old, and he looked it now, in a way he hadn't before. The slickness was gone. What was left was just a man trying to find his way back to somewhere solid. "I know," I said. "I should have trusted you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." We sat there as the sun moved across the sky, and the shadow of the barn stretched out across the pasture in the late afternoon light. I poured him a cup of coffee from the thermos I kept on the porch rail. He took it without saying thank you, the way you don't thank someone for something that was already yours. Before he left, I walked him to the barn and showed him his great-grandfather's initials in the beam. He ran his fingers over the carved letters the way you touch something old and real to make sure it's still there. There are things worth protecting in this world, and things worth letting go. I spent 32 years in conference rooms learning to tell the difference. The hardest lesson I ever learned was that the people we love most are both categories at once. You hold on to them with everything you have, and sometimes you let the consequences land where they're supposed to land, because that is the only way a person learns what things are actually worth. My grandfather broke this land. My father kept it. I fought for it. And someday, if my son becomes the man I believe he still has time to become, he will sit on this same porch with his own children and tell them the story of the morning his father came back to the ranch in a good suit and reminded everyone what it means to actually own something. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Saga. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever had to let someone you love face the consequences of their own choices? Tell me your story. I read every single one. Until next time, stay patient, stay principled, and remember that the contracts that matter most are the ones written in character, not ink.